Welcome back to Midnight Disclosure. Tonight, as you close your eyes and let the weight of the day drift away, we step into a story carried by the desert wind, a story of shadows, of secrets, and of one man who dared to speak what few would believe. Take a slow breath in and let it go. Another breath. Feel your chest rise and fall. Let the rhythm settle. Now, imagine yourself lying beneath the Nevada sky. Above you, the stars burn cold and distant. Their light is ancient, silent, eternal. The air is crisp. It carries the dry scent of earth and sagebrush. And somewhere far off, a wire fence hums in the night wind. Its steel strands gleam like silver threads beneath the moon. The desert is never silent. Listen, crickets, cicadas, a lone coyote calling across the ridges. Each sound rises, then fades, as if the desert itself is holding its breath. Beyond those fences, hidden behind checkpoints and blacked-out roads, lies a place that haunts the imagination, Area 51. But tonight, we do not wander old myths of Groom Lake. Tonight, we follow one man, Bob Lazar. Stand with him now on a forgotten dirt road. Ahead, the mountains loom like dark sentinels, their jagged silhouettes lost against the starry void. Florida, 1959. A boy named Robert Scott Lazar was born beneath the warm coral gable sun. From the very beginning, he was different. While other children chased balls across quiet streets, Bob chased sparks. He loved wires, switches, the hiss of chemicals, the sharp smell of engines. Neighbors would see him crouched over strange contraptions. Little rockets made from pipes, homemade lasers, a bicycle rigged with a jet engine. Dangerous, reckless, but filled with wonder. Bob wasn't the loud child in class. He was quiet, watching, taking things apart, only to put them back together in ways no one expected. His mother once said, if it made noise, if it lit up, or if it exploded, Bob wanted to know why. That curiosity never let him rest. By the time he was a teenager, his garage looked less like a playroom and more like a laboratory. Coils of copper wire, glass tubes, stacks of technical magazines stained with oil. He wasn't chasing grades or trophies. He was chasing knowledge, and that chase gave him a strange aura. Friends thought he was brilliant. Teachers thought he was distracted. But Bob, he thought of himself as something simpler, a tinkerer, a boy obsessed with the hidden rules of machines. The 1970s carried him further west. Lasers were his fascination now, their beams glowing red across dark rooms. Each invention, each spark of light, fed his belief that technology was more than tools. It was a language, a code to be cracked. No one around him could guess that this same restless tinkerer would one day claim to touch something far beyond human hands. A craft that defied gravity itself. But before the desert, before S4, before the spotlight of 1989, there was just a boy, alone with his machines, and the sound of wires humming softly in the night. By the early 1980s, Bob Lazar had left Florida behind. The road carried him west, across deserts and mountains, until he reached New Mexico, Los Alamos, a place whispered about even then, a town built in the shadow of the atomic age, where laboratories hid behind guarded gates, where silence was part of everyday life. Bob claimed he worked there, not as a janitor, not as a clerk, but as a physicist, contributing to classified projects. The truth is murky. Official records are thin. Some say his name never appeared on rosters. Others point to fragments, a 1982 phone directory listing him as a technician, a newspaper photo showing him near a particle accelerator. Was he really a scientist at Los Alamos, or just a curious outsider circling its edges? The answer never came clearly, and that ambiguity would follow him for the rest of his life. Still, imagine the world he walked through, long corridors humming with machines, doors locked by codes and keycards, rooms where men in white coats bent over experiments they could never describe at home. This was the Cold War. Every whisper of technology was guarded like gold. Nuclear secrets, particle physics, projects funded in silence, buried in budgets no one could trace. Bob's mind, restless as ever, drank in the atmosphere. He spoke later of lasers, exotic fuels, and propulsion systems far ahead of the time. Whether he stood inside the lab or just at its edges, something about Los Alamos left a mark on him. At night, driving back through the desert roads, the headlights carving tunnels of light in the darkness, Bob must have wondered what he had truly seen. Were those experiments just human ambition? Or did they point toward something greater, something hidden? In those shadows, between secrecy and speculation, his story began to shift. The tinkerer boy of Florida was now standing closer to the veil of government mysteries, and soon he would step across it, into Nevada, into Groom Lake, toward the place called S4. Las Vegas, the late 1980s, neon lights painted the desert night in colors too bright to be real. Casino towers shimmered, billboards flashed endlessly, the hum of slot machines spilled into every corner. But just beyond the city's edge, the lights ended. The road stretched into emptiness, and the desert returned to silence. For most, Vegas was the end of the map. For Bob Lazar, it was only the beginning. He settled here quietly, a man with a fascination for speed and machines. He built cars that roared like thunder, engines modified with jet turbines. His neighbors whispered about the scientist who turned science fiction into horsepower. By day, Bob lived an ordinary life, a modest home, a workshop filled with tools, a marriage weighed down by strain but stitched together by routine. To anyone passing by, he looked like a man chasing hobbies, not secrets. But the desert carried other rumors. Talk of Groom Lake, talk of a restricted base north of Vegas where strange lights were said to dance in the sky. Area 51, a name that at the time was little more than a whisper among locals and pilots. Late at night, when the city dimmed and the desert wind returned, Bob must have felt it. The pull of something hidden, the sense that just beyond those mountains, a truth waited, something that could change everything he thought he knew. It was a calm time, the calm before the storm. Bob was still anonymous. The world had no reason to know his name, but soon the fences would open. Soon he would claim to step into hangars carved into the mountainside. Soon his story would ignite a fire that still burns decades later. For now, picture him in those quiet nights, a man standing in the neon glow of Las Vegas, staring north toward Groom Lake, listening to the silence of the desert and wondering what waited in the shadows. The desert road was long, empty, a line of dust stretching across Nevada's endless silence. Bob Lazar sat on a blacked-out bus. The windows were sealed. No view of the outside world, only the hum of the engine and the weight of armed guards at the front. He had passed security checks, background interviews, polygraphs that pressed into his nerves, each step pulling him further from the ordinary life he once knew. As the bus turned, he felt it, a shift. The air seemed heavier, the silence deeper, the sense that he was being carried somewhere no map would ever show. Finally, the vehicle slowed, the brakes hissed, and when the doors opened, he stepped into a place hidden in the bones of the mountain. Before him stood hangars. At first, they looked like cliffs, stone faces rising against the desert night. But as he drew closer, the illusion dissolved. The doors were carved into the rock itself, camouflaged perfectly, seamless, silent. It was the entrance to S4. Bob's breath caught in his chest. The air smelled faintly metallic, like iron warmed by the sun. Guards moved with quiet precision. Cameras turned, unblinking. Every step inside carried the weight of secrecy. The corridors were narrow, painted in sterile light. Each door locked, each turn marked by warning signs. No talking, no questions, just movement forward. And then, the first glimpse, far at the end of the passage, through the open mouth of a hangar, a shape waited, smooth, curved, metallic, like nothing built by human hands. Bob stopped walking. For a moment, the world seemed to fall silent. The guards urged him on, but his mind lingered on that impossible sight. It was only the beginning, the first step into the heart of S4, where the ordinary laws of science would bend, where Lazar's life would never be the same again. Inside the hangar, the air felt heavy. The walls swallowed sound. Each footstep echoed faintly, then disappeared. And there, at the center, stood the craft. It shimmered in the dim light, a disk, compact and sleek. No rivets, no seams, no bolts. As if it had been poured from a single piece of metal. They called it the sport model. Bob's eyes locked onto it. It was small, elegant, not monstrous like a battleship, not crude like a machine built for war. It was delicate, precise, and somehow alive. He walked closer. Each step made his heart pound louder. When his hand finally brushed the surface, he froze. It was cold, smooth like steel, yet lighter, almost weightless beneath his touch. Not rough, not sharp, just impossibly perfect. The hangar lights bent strangely across its surface, as though the metal itself was bending the air around it. Bob blinked, but the shimmer remained. The entrance was narrow. Inside, everything was scaled differently. The ceilings were low, the chairs small, no more than 3 feet high. It was as if the craft had been built for someone else, not for us. The interior was bare, no wires, no switches, no panels covered in buttons, only smooth, curved walls. And at the center, a single column. That column reached from floor to ceiling, silent, immovable, the heart of the craft. Bob was told it was the reactor, the core that made everything possible. But in that moment, he didn't think of physics or equations. He thought of wonder and of fear, because standing inside the sport model felt like standing inside a secret that was never meant for human eyes. At the heart of the craft stood the column, silent, unmoving. But Bob was told this was no decoration. It was the reactor, the source of its power, and from it extended the impossible. 3 devices hidden beneath the floor. He called them gravity amplifiers, each one able to bend space itself, each one able to pull the universe out of shape. The design was simple in appearance, but its effect was beyond imagination. The amplifiers did not push. They did not burn fuel. They did not roar like engines. Instead, they pulled. They curved. They created a well, a ripple, a distortion in the very fabric of space-time. Bob described it this way. Imagine dropping a stone into a pond. The ripples spread outward, moving water around them. Now, imagine a craft riding those ripples, not flying, but falling into the space ahead of it. That was how the sport model moved. And at its core was something stranger still, a fuel unknown to science in 1989. He called it Element 115. In Bob's telling, this element was stable, a piece of matter not found on Earth. When bombarded inside the reactor, it released a wave, not heat, not radiation, but pure gravitational energy. That energy flowed into the amplifiers. The amplifiers focused it, and suddenly the craft was no longer bound by Earth's pull. It was free. The ship could tilt its amplifiers forward and fall toward the horizon, or aim them straight down, and lift effortlessly into the night sky. No wings, no exhaust, no sound, just a shimmer in the air, and movement that seemed more like thought than flight. Bob admitted he never understood it fully. His team was compartmentalized. He worked only on the propulsion. Others studied the metal, others studied the controls, pieces of a puzzle no one was allowed to see whole. But what he did see changed him forever, because the sport model did not move like a machine. It moved like a secret, defying inertia, mocking gravity, falling through space as if space itself had been rewritten. And in those silent hangars of S4, Bob Lazar realized he was staring at technology centuries, maybe millennia, ahead of us. The secret weighed heavily on him, too heavy for silence. Bob Lazar had seen the impossible. He had touched it, watched it shimmer in the hangars of S4. But holding that secret alone felt like drowning in shadows. So one night, he made a dangerous choice. He told his friends. They met just outside Las Vegas. A physicist named Jean Huff, Bob's wife at the time, Carol, and a few others, all curious, all nervous. The plan was simple. Drive out into the desert, find a ridge overlooking Papoose Lake, just south of Groom Lake, and wait. Bob knew the schedule. He said test flights happened midweek after dark, Wednesday nights, when the desert was empty and the world was asleep. They carried binoculars, camcorders, a thermos of coffee against the cold Nevada wind. And in that quiet night, they settled into the sand. For a while, there was nothing, only stars above, and the sound of wind rushing over stone. Then it appeared, a light, small at first, then brighter, a glowing orb rising silently above the mountains. It hovered, motionless, like a star that had broken free from the sky. Then it moved, sideways, straight up, straight down. Angles no aircraft could follow, movements that mocked the laws of inertia. The group gasped, the camcorder shook in trembling hands. Even through grainy footage, the light was unmistakable. It was just as Bob had described, silent, smooth, effortless. The friends stared in awe and in fear, because they knew they were watching something they were not meant to see. The following week, they returned. Again, the light appeared. Again, it danced across the sky. Each time, the pattern was the same: hover, dart, vanish. But on the third night, everything changed. Engines in the distance, spotlights sweeping the desert, military vehicles cresting the ridge. They were found. Armed men stepped out of the dark, their voices sharp, their presence undeniable. The group was detained, names taken, cameras seized. For Bob, the warning was clearer than words. his cover was gone. The walls of S4 were closing in. Soon after, he was called in, questioned, confronted with transcripts of his private phone calls. Proof that he was being watched. The message was simple. You are finished here. Do not come back. But the secret was already too heavy, and Bob Lazar could no longer carry it in silence. The warning had been delivered, cold, sharp, undeniable. Bob Lazar knew his time at S4 was over. The badge no longer worked. The doors would not open. The men in suits had made it clear he was now a liability. But silence was no longer an option. The secret pressed against his chest like a weight. He felt the eyes watching him everywhere. Cars parked near his home. Helicopters drifting low in the night. Phones clicking with invisible ears. He feared for his life. He feared for his wife. And yet, he feared something more, that the truth would die with him. So Bob chose to speak first. In May of 1989, he walked into a television studio in Las Vegas. The room smelled of hot lights and nervous anticipation. A journalist named George Knapp prepared the cameras. The world was about to hear something it had never heard before. Bob did not show his face, not yet. He sat in shadow, his voice disguised by a machine. He gave himself an alias, Dennis, and then he began. He told of S4, the hangars carved into the mountainside, the 9 craft hidden within. He described the sport model, the gravity amplifiers, the element 115 that bent the universe itself. His voice was calm, measured, not the rant of a wild-eyed fantasist, but the steady words of a man who had seen too much. He explained how the work was divided, how each team was isolated, forbidden to share, how security followed every step, how silence was enforced with fear. Knapp listened. The cameras rolled, and across Nevada, the broadcast flickered into living rooms. Viewers sat forward in their chairs. Some laughed, some froze, some whispered. A man, claiming to have worked on alien spacecraft, was speaking on live television. For the first time, the name Area 51 began to spread beyond pilots and locals. It leapt into headlines. It burned across late-night radio, and in the desert silence, the storm began. The broadcast could not be undone. The words had left his mouth, and they spread like fire. Area 51, S4, 9 alien craft, gravity amplifiers, element 1 of 15. The world had heard it all, but with every ear that listened came a dozen voices ready to strike back. Reporters began digging. Scientists raised their eyebrows. Officials shook their heads. And the hunt began. They looked first at his education. Lazar had claimed degrees from MIT and Caltech, prestigious, unquestionable. But when journalists searched, there were no records, no transcripts, no yearbooks, no classmates who remembered his face. It was as if he had never been there at all. Skeptics pounced. They called him a fraud, a liar, weaving science fiction into the language of physics. But Bob stood firm. He said the government had erased his history. He said the absence was not proof of lies, but proof of power. Then they turned to Los Alamos, the laboratory he once named as his employer. Official rosters held nothing. No Lazar, no physicist by that name. And yet, a phone book from 1982 listed him as a technician, and a newspaper photo showed him standing by a particle accelerator. Contradiction, silence, fragments of truth scattered like broken glass. The public grew divided. Was he a whistleblower, stripped of identity by the very forces he defied, or a clever pretender, weaving half-facts into a legend? The more he spoke, the sharper the knives became. Editorials mocked him. Experts dismantled him. Officials dismissed him. But every dismissal, every doubt, only deepened the mystery. Because no matter how hard they tried, they could not erase the calm way he told his story. No anger, no theatrics, just details, consistent, unshaken. And the more they tried to bury him, the more people leaned in to listen. The manhunt of credibility had begun, but in trying to destroy his name, they gave his story a life of its own. The cameras faded, the lights went dark, but Bob Lazar's life would never return to silence. The interview had made him famous or infamous. Every headline carried his name. Every conversation in UFO circles began with his story. But fame did not bring safety. It brought fracture at home. The strain deepened. His wife, Carol, carried the weight of whispers and surveillance. Strange cars parked down their street. Late-night phone calls with no voice on the line. The paranoia was no longer imagination. It was daily life. Friends withdrew. Some feared being watched themselves. Others feared the ridicule of being linked to him. A few stayed loyal, but most kept their distance. Bob was left standing in a shrinking circle, alone, with his secret. And then came the blow that seemed to seal his fate. In the early 1990s, Bob was arrested, charged with aiding and abetting a prostitution ring. It had nothing to do with UFOs, nothing to do with S4, but in the eyes of the public, it was enough. The eccentric scientist, the man who claimed alien secrets, now had a criminal record. For many, that was the end of the story. Proof he was untrustworthy. Proof the Lazar legend was a house of cards. But for others, it was only fuel. They whispered that he had been targeted, that the charges were a weapon, a way to stain his name forever. Bob himself said little. He did not fight for sympathy. He did not beg to be believed. He simply lived, carrying his burden quietly. Still, the cost was visible. The wide-eyed tinkerer of his youth was gone. The restless innovator had become a weary figure, shadowed by suspicion. Every attempt to speak out was met with louder doubt. Every step forward drew more eyes, more pressure, more silence. His life unraveled, thread by thread, not with a single moment, but with 1,000 small cuts. And yet, one thing never changed. Through it all, Bob Lazar did not take back his story, not once. Long after the interviews had aired, the questions lingered. Not about Bob Lazar, the man, but about the machines he described. Could such technology exist? Could space itself be bent and folded by human hands? At the center of his story was the reactor. Small, silent. No smoke, no exhaust. A device no larger than a basketball, yet powerful enough to generate a gravity field. To scientists, the idea sounded absurd. Gravity is the weakest of all forces. It holds planets together, yes, but to manipulate it directly, to generate it at will, that lay far beyond our reach. And yet, Lazar insisted he had seen it, not in theory, not in equations, but in practice. The key, he said, was element 115, unknown to science in 1989, a fuel that, when struck inside the reactor, produced a well of gravitational energy, an energy then amplified and directed by waveguides. 3 gravity amplifiers, focused, controlled, and suddenly, the craft was free. It did not fly. It fell into the warped space ahead of it, like a leaf caught on invisible currents. To many, this was nonsense. Physics did not allow such miracles, but others paused, because some pieces matched whispers already alive in theoretical science. General relativity. Einstein's equations had shown that space and time could bend. That gravity was not a force in the ordinary sense, but the curvature of the universe itself. What Lazar described sounded like science fiction, but also like a story told in the language of relativity. Years later, in 2003, the element appeared, not in desert hangars, but in laboratories. Moscovium, atomic number 115, created by scientists in Russia, unstable, decaying in less than a blink, but real. For Lazar, this was vindication. For skeptics, it was proof of coincidence because his element was supposed to be stable, and the laboratories of Earth could not make it so. Still, the mystery deepened. Could another isotope exist? One stable enough to power a reactor, perhaps on another planet, perhaps forged in the heart of a distant star. No answer came, only speculation, and so the paradox remained. Physics said no, but Lazar said yes, and in that tension, the legend grew, because sometimes the line between the impossible and the undiscovered is thinner than we imagine. For years, skeptics pointed to the holes, no diplomas, no records, no proof. But then, small fragments began to surface, fragments that seemed to whisper, maybe, just maybe. Bob had not lied. The first was a machine, not a reactor, not a craft, but something simple, something mundane, a hand scanner. Lazar had described it in 1989, a rectangular device with metal prongs. It scanned the bones of a hand, measuring the length of each finger and the width of the knuckles. He said it was used at S4 to confirm identity. At the time, no one believed him. Reporters scoffed. Security experts shook their heads. It sounded like a detail invented for drama. But decades later, photographs emerged. Old, faded images of a hand scanner once used by the military. The design matched Lazar's description exactly. Prongs, plates, bone measurements. Suddenly, one piece of his puzzle no longer seemed fictional. Then came the element, number 115, in laboratories, unstable, but real. And its very existence stirred whispers, because Bob had spoken of it long before it entered the periodic table. More whispers followed. In 2017, the Pentagon released videos, Navy pilots chasing objects shaped like tic-tacs, craft that move without wings, without heat signatures, without explanation. The description, eerily close to Lazar's words decades earlier. Silent flight, sudden acceleration, gravity-defying turns. For many, this was not proof, but it was enough to reopen the file, enough to wonder if Bob's story had been more than fantasy. Piece by piece, the fragments gathered. A hand scanner, an element, a flight pattern captured on military radar. Not a complete picture, never the whole truth, but enough to keep the whispers alive, enough to make people ask the question, if he was making it all up, why did the world keep catching up to him? For decades, the debate has circled, endless, unresolved. On one side, the skeptics. They call him a fraud, a man who built a legend from lies. They point to missing diplomas, empty records, the stumble of his personal life. They say he is clever, yes, but not credible. On the other side, the believers. They see a man who risked everything, his career, his marriage, his freedom. They argue no hoax is worth that price. No fraud would endure ridicule for 30 years without ever changing his story. And then there are those in between, neither convinced nor dismissive. They linger in the gray, where doubt and wonder walk together, because the truth is, his story refuses to die. It does not fade like most conspiracies. It does not collapse under scrutiny. It simply remains uncomfortable, unanswered. Perhaps Lazar invented it all. A tale spun from Cold War rumors and science fiction dreams. Perhaps it was planted. A decoy used to mislead curious eyes from darker projects. Or perhaps he really did step into S4 and really did touch a machine not made by human hands. The question hovers in the silence, unmoving, unanswered. What if it was true? What if beyond the desert fence lies technology centuries ahead of us? What if the line between hoax and revelation is thinner than we dare to believe? The desert holds its secrets, the mountains keep their silence, and Bob Lazar remains in the middle, neither proven false nor proven true, between hoax and truth. The desert night has grown still. The stars hang quietly above Nevada, cold, unblinking, eternal. We have walked with Bob Lazar, through the shadows of S4, through the hangars carved into stone, through the machines that whispered of another world. We have seen his life unravel, his story doubted, his name dragged through both ridicule and wonder. And yet, the mystery remains. The fences still stand, the watchtowers still scan the horizon, the desert wind still carries secrets across the sand. Was it truth? Was it invention? Or was it something stranger still, caught between the two? Only the silence knows. And the silence does not answer. As you lie back now, let the desert return to calm. Hear the faint hum of crickets. Feel the cool wind brushing across the dunes. Imagine the moonlight spilling softly over Groom Lake. Let your breath slow. Inhale, exhale, like the rhythm of the desert itself. And as sleep begins to take you, remember this. Some mysteries live not to be solved, but to be carried quietly like a whisper in the night. Good night, and let the silence of the desert stay with you.